Guten Abend, good evening. Today it's Mazagon after Shivaji Park and Gaodevi, one of the 7 islands of Bombay, now part of the Mumbai metropolitan area. And between this was and is 3 centuries. So there was a Mazagon Heritage Walk organized by Center for Study of Society and Secularism as part of Diversity in Mumbai course. It was led by Rafiq Baghdadi, the historian, the celebrated historian. And he said Mazagon is truly cosmopolitan. Not only are there diverse communities, but that they have accepted one another and live beautifully together. So we also saw the traces of different communities, Parsis and Jews and Christians and Hindus and Muslims and even the small Chinese community during that walk. So as you know, the island of Mazagon used to be an extensively hilly and forested area. And whether it's Mazagon, Mazagon or Machagaon, we'll come to know about it. So again, there are wadis in Mazagon, if you remember, Anjir Wadi, Tad Wadi, Nariyal Wadi, Sitafal Wadi. So this mix of communities, their cultures and their architecture, that's what we are going to explore today. And now, just 3 days ago, there was an article in Hindustan Times where Captain Ramesh Babu was quoted. He says, Mumbai has a way of erasing its past. Sad, but true. So in these 3 centuries, the transformation, the 2-story buildings and British era bungalows, we are going on this exploration journey. Thank you, Asad. Thank you, Avid Learning Team, for giving Goethe Institute Maximilian Bhavan this opportunity to collaborate with you and taking us on these wonderful journeys. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashree. Thank you, Bjorn, Robert, for being our partner in this series and hosting us every month. And we'll be back next month with another edition. But let's begin with a bit of trivia. It's actually personal trivia. So what connects the late lawyer and scholar A.G. Noorani, the maestro Zubin Mehta, who was here last month, the legend Freddie Mercury, and our wonderful moderator, where is he, Nikhil Mahashur, and myself? Well, we are all proud alumni of the St. Mary's High School in Mazagon, an institution that has been spanning over 160 years. For us, Mazagon is not just another precinct, it's an intrinsic memory of our formidable years, occupying a special corner in our hearts. While we started researching and curating this episode of our Precinct series, I received a very timely email from Sunavi Desai, the publisher of Indus Source Books. Now, the last time I heard from her was 10 years ago, where we actually did another whole event on cinema, where she introduced me to Captain Ramesh Babu and his remarkable book, My Own Mazagon. And serendipitously, this connection happened, and we set things in motion. I'm delighted to share that Captain Ramesh Babu has journeyed all the way from Kerala to be with us here today. His vast knowledge of Mazagon will undoubtedly enrich us and adding another layer of insight into this fascinating precinct. So thank you, Sunavi and Captain Babu, for making this happen. In 2021, we launched the Uncovering Urban Legacies series, which we focused on small yet influential communities woven into the city's fabric. We delved into the rich narratives of the Jewish, the Iranian, the Persian, the Portuguese, the Chinese, the Sindhis, the Parsis, and the Koli communities. And then we shifted our focus to precincts, areas of heritage, cultural value that create a sense of place and a collective identity with a feeling of pride to its residents. And this brings me to our task at hand. Avid Learning, in collaboration with the Goethe Institute, Maximilian Bhavan Mumbai, Kalagora Association, START, Walkitecture, X and Zero, and Indus Source Books presents Uncovering Urban Legacies, Stories of Mumbai's Precincts, Mazagon. Please join me in welcoming our panel of experts, author, My Own Mazagon, Captain Ramesh Babu, retired. We have actually founder Subco Specialty Coffee and Roaster Rahul Reddy, but he's not here, and I'm hoping the coffee is brewing and he will show up soon. Typographer and design director, Bombay Duck Design, Zeenat Kulubur. And our moderator and partner for this series, principal architect, NM Associates, and founder of Architecture, Nikhil Mahashur. We're going to begin the proceedings with Captain Ramesh Babu's address. And now I have to clarify this. We have written it down. It's quite interesting. It's not a formal PowerPoint presentation because according to him, a PPT stands for no power to make your point. So he's just going to talk with some images going at the back. And followed that, Nikhil will be sharing a few slides and inviting the panel on for a discussion. Thank you all for being here in such large numbers. We'll arrange for a few more seats at the back. And over to you, Captain.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming over in such large numbers. I should formally thank the sponsors of this event, my publisher, and the team that worked with me to bring out this book. Let me just start by asking you, how many of you are from Mazagon? Okay. How many of you know Mazagon? Okay, everybody knows Mazagon. Okay. So for a moment, imagine that you are a Bhandari. You know who is a Bhandari? A toddy tapper of, let's say, 1510. So a 16th century, an early 16th century toddy tapper you are, and you are sitting on top of a tart palm, you know, of a palm tree on the Bandarwada hill. So obviously the Bandarwada hill is named after the Bhandari. Okay, so you are a Bhandari toddy tapper, tapping toddy, sitting on top of a palm tree on top of that hill. And now you look around. The year is 1510. So you look around towards your west, you will see, you know, the farmers, the agris, farming their paddy, their vegetables, or panning salt. And beyond that, you see marshlands. Beyond that, you will see, as they call, calls of Arabian calls, like waves coming in through the breach candy and washing the shores of that marshland that today lie beyond Baikala. So that's what you see to your west. To your south, you will see the Nauroji Hill, which doesn't exist anymore. To your north, you will see an entire ridge going right up to the Godabdev rock, which today stands near the railroad station with a rock temple. So that probably is the very first temple of Mazagon. And that rock temple was worshipped by the Kohlis, whom you see when you look towards the east in that bay, fishing. So since they were catching Matsya, they call their village Matsya Grama. Now, in between you and the fishing Kohlis, you might see a few buffaloes, Mahishis, lying in the marshland. So some people call Mazagon Mahishi Grama. But I would like to call it my own village. That's the meaning we give now. So Mazagon is my own village, Mazagon. There is a Portuguese interpretation also, because one of the Moroccan posts of theirs was called Mazagon, so they borrowed that name and brought it. Several interpretations. But let's call it our own village. And I have a reason to call it my own village and our own village. Now, the next generation toddy tapper is on the palm, okay? And slowly he sees some changes happening around. He sees a few boats which are unlike the Kohli dugout canoes, and he sees the cross on it. So he sees the Portuguese coming. And the Portuguese come in, set up an entire manor there, and make it their richest island. The Portuguese got their highest revenue from Mazagon. So Mazagon was once the richest island amongst all the 7 islands. The next generation comes, toddy tapping goes on. So we still have a lot of tart palms. We still got a lot of brap trees around. So the next generation of toddy tapper comes. He looks down, and then he sees bungalows coming up. He sees a church come up on the waterfront that we know today as the Gloria Church in a different location. Then he sees more white men coming. He is unaware of treaties that are happening in marriages. He is unaware of islands getting passed on to the British. But he knows that there are more white men coming in. And the mango orchard there starts getting a garrison of Mughal soldiers, because the mangoes are now sought after by Shah Jahan. Then he sees further development happening, and a small dock developing. Okay? Now we come to the next generation of toddy tappers. Toddy tapping is still going on. There are more palm trees. We see more churches coming. We see some schools develop. And the Siddhis, who are the admirals of the Mughals, attack this place. So there must be a reason, right? And that is when his strategic mind works. And he sees this island of mine is actually very strategically located, that from atop this hill, I can see this entire Bombay, I can see this entire harbor, right up to Kasara, the Kasara Ghats. That's why they named one of the basins of Mazagon Dock as Kasara Basin. Okay, so right up to Kasara, all the way you can see this entire harbor. So it's a very strategic place. And that's why this place got the interests of the powers that be. Unfortunately, the Siddhis get after the British so badly that they abandon the fort in Mazagon and decide to develop a fort in this H-shaped island, which we know as the Bombay Fort. But Mazagon doesn't lose its significance. Like Navi Mumbai has become the suburb of Bombay, Mazagon now becomes the suburb of the fort. So while fort is this big officious place with official bungalows, just enough space for the fort to grow, the people who work in the fort, the well-to-do people who work in the fort need a Navi Mumbai. So they come to Mazagon. So the next generation of toddy tappers now see more bungalows coming up, and people who are running the business in the fort, having their estates, having their bungalows, having their residences, the Parsis, people like Jamshedji Gigi Boy having his bungalow there, people like David Sassoon having his bungalow there, people like Prem Chand having his bungalow there, the British governor of Bombay having his bungalow there, Mr. Hornby having his bungalow there, a lot of British officials having their bungalow there. So Mazagon now becomes this metropolitan living area, which is a suburb of Bombay. And the next generation toddy tapper sees that the hill on which he had these palm trees where he was perched is now turned into an underground water tank. So that is the Bandarwada water tank. Very similar to the hanging garden. Okay, and some of the toddy tapping trees get chopped down. And he also sees that idyllic cove and that idyllic backwater in which his Kohli brethren were fishing is now being filled in. And the hills around, like the Nauroji Hills, is being moved down. On the western side, he sees a vellard being built. And he sees the area in between, the paddy growing area, is now drying up. Paddy incidentally needs a lot of salt water. Yes. But paddy growing areas dry up. It gets parched. And, frantically, these areas are being filled up. That khadi, that little, breach that he had on the southern side, that he called the Umbar Khadi, named after the Umbar tree, is also filled up. And his island slowly loses its identity. Then the dock develops, the waterfront develops, industries come in, the railways come in and cut out a part of his island. What we know as JJ Hospital and all, which was part of Mazagon, now gets cut out. And the dock really starts growing, and around the dock, shipping happens. Much before Bombay Port Trust develops, the next generation of Bandaris on the tree see P&O's vessels coming. P&O's vessels were actually berthed in Mazagon. That's why you see hotels here, you know. The map is not very clear, but Mazagon was the place to have the first of the posh hotels in Bombay. There are places like Hope Hall, Hamilton, and all these hotels in Mazagon. And as industry grows, opium trade happens, shipbuilding happens. So the Mazagon dock gets into shipbuilding. From 1774, they started as a repair yard, but come 1820s, 1830s, the Wadias who are building ships here move into Mazagon, and they have now the Ritchie dock, the Mughal dock, the old Mazagon dock itself, and a lot of shipbuilding happens there. Now B&I comes in, the British India Steam Navigation Company. Together, they have two docks now, the South Dock and the North Dock. And shipbuilding continues. Other industries move in. Naturally, cotton would move in. Right? Timber would move in. And once timber moves in, there's a risk of fire. So one Bhandari sees that his Tadwadi village going up in flames, because the timber mill there goes up in flames. So they decide to have a Lakdi Bandar. Now they have custom built bandars. They have Reti Bandar, they have Lakdi Bandar, they have this bandar, that bandar. In between, they decide to make gunpowder in India. They first set up the gunpowder factory near the manor house that we know today, Ayana Zangre. And there are disastrous results. Because one soldier decides to play a prank by tying up some gunpowder in a pouch on a dog's tail. So no dog appears, so he just throws the gunpowder up. And that falls onto gunpowder which was being put out on the rampart for drying. And there's a major fire. There are several disasters like this, and they decide that the safest place to have a gunpowder factory is Mazagon. So they have Daru Khana there. Daru Khana is not liquor, it is gunpowder. Okay, so we still have a gunpowder road there. Now, to support all these industries, our local workforce comes in. The East Indians come in. So they set up their own Gauthan called Mathar Pakadi. Then the Muslims come in from Hyderabad, Konkan, North India and all that. The Parsis were always there. The Shia Muslims were always there, and their leader comes all the way from Iran, taking 5 years, participating in the first Anglo-Afghan war in the meantime, and becomes the Aga Khan, to be buried in Mazagon finally. Okay, so so the richness of this place is, for the area that it covers, a few square kilometers, I would vouch, is much more intense than South Bombay. Okay? That's why Mazagon is important. But over the years, as shipbuilding progresses, Chinese come in. The Sheniwar Teli Jews come in, much before the Baghdadi Jews come. Okay, and along with the Christian schools like St. Mary's, the Isabel School, the St. Peter's, and all these institutions, they also start the Eli Khaduri School, which is for Jewish kids who are the Indian Jews, and also for Chinese children. They set up a Chinese temple. The Jains set up their own temple. The Kolis had their own temples. Hanuman temples come in. And because of the East Indians, we have a lot of these crosses come in. Okay, so that's how Mazagon has grown. And over the years, the palms got chopped down, the Bhandaris went out of business, a lot of other initial businesses also went out of business, except shipbuilding, which has continued. And the communities that once enriched Mazagon as a real metropolitan place. It was in the low-lying lane, that couples in love would walk hand in hand and give it the name Love Lane. Okay, so from there, it came to what we know today as a place of the novo rich who cannot afford an accommodation in South Bombay, looking for a 65-storied building, much taller than the Bhandari's palm tree, without being able to enjoy what he enjoyed. Okay, and that is the genesis that has happened to Mazagon, like the rest of Bombay, which when I came in as a 19-year-old boy from the Defense Academy, I was fascinated. But I don't miss the city now, because the old city has lost its charm. And when I left the city, I said I used to conduct heritage walks here in the naval dockyard and all. So I said I should write something for the city's heritage that I can leave behind as a parting gift. And that's how I wrote my own Mazagon. It's for you to enjoy. I see a lot of familiar faces here. Some of my contacts through Mazagon Dock are here. My own classmate is here, who has been a Mumbaikar, and a lot of other familiar places. She's here. My publisher is here, and all of you are here. I've gone back to my roots. I live with my chicken and my, my little farm in my Kerala village. But the city is yours. Look after it. Maintain its heritage. How can a city very thoughtlessly throw off old names and put a name of a person who's nothing to do with that place? The same thing is happening all over the place. So if there's a way that it can be preserved, Matharpakadi definitely needs to be preserved, like Kotachiwadi. Unfortunately, there are old people there who are struggling, as these tall buildings are literally taking over their place. So if you all can do something, my book would have found its purpose. Thank you very much for coming over. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Captain. I think it was fantastic. I think you've taken us through the history. What I'm going to do is give a picture, give a face, give a photo to what you've just spoken. So I'll be very quick. We've also organized a walk with Captain tomorrow morning at 8:30. So you can register at the desk. So to tempt you more, I'm going to talk a little bit more. I'll show you a bit more photos. So I know Sir left with a painful note about how Bombay is changing, but I'll still show you some of the structures that still remain. So we can, before we start the panel, we can start it on a little happy note. My memory of Mazagon for a long time was St. Mary's, where we grew up, and I cannot start a presentation without putting up the school's photo, and you can see how beautiful the school is. And I think this is what inspired us to be architects. I mean, you enter the school and the Gothic architecture really takes you by storm. I think it's one of the most beautiful schools, the most beautiful school in Bombay. So I didn't know much about Mazagon till, I kind of matured as an architect and looked at the buildings around. But I'll tell you 3 best ways to look at Mazagon. One is that you take a walk through Mazagon and learn about it, because it's quite a big place. It extends from JJ Hospital on one side till the zoo on the other, and then Darukhana. The second one is, of course, to read Sir's book. You can read the book and learn so much more about Mazagon. And the third one is if you can go through Zeenat's map. I think it'll show you the newer version of Mazagon, but it's as fascinating. So you'll get to see, the book shows you the old versions of Mazagon, and you'll see the latest version, the latest creations on Zeenat's map, and it's beautiful. And you can take both these things and then grab a coffee at Sabko. If you see, I just wanted to show you an old photo of Mazagon and how beautiful it looks. This is the photo taken from the Mazagon hills, and you'll see all the ships there and all the, the low-lying areas of Mazagon as well. This is the island map of Mazagon and how it's actually changed. So you'll see Mazagon there, which is the 4th island of Bombay, and you'll see how much we've actually reclaimed. But everything grew, and Mazagon was little stone houses and nice British bungalows or palaces at one point of time. And whenever you read Sir's books, and you'll realize that how many beautiful mansions that actually survived at that time, and unfortunately they've all been broken down. But the architecture of that time was purely European. You go there and you'll fall in love with Mazagon, and Love Lane is described, and of course it's debatable whether Love Lane was with couples holding hands, or whether it was a low-lying area, and that's how it got its name. But I think couples holding hands is a more soothing version of the lane, so we'll stick to that story. Of course, the Wadias also had their bungalow in Mazagon, and Wadias were essentially shipbuilders. The name means shipbuilders from Surat, and when they came here and they settled here, and that's how the shipbuilding business grew. And then, of course, Bombay's cotton trade grew, and then there was it was imperative that we actually have a Mazagon dock, and then we had the docks that came in. And you can see older photos of how the docks were built. But the most fascinating thing is that whenever you look at the older photos, you'll see how beautiful the views into Mazagon and out of Mazagon were, because you could actually see Colaba and the fort area from Mazagon. And Mazagon, in a sense, was, I think very European, because it had the sea and then it had the hill. So if you can imagine, say Amalfi or any of these European cities at that time, then you're talking about Mazagon. Sir spoke about, the garden, the reservoir that was there on the hill, and this is how it looks. If you want to promise someone a world tour, then the best thing is to take them to the garden. That's the most economical world tour you'll get in Bombay, because it's got all the 7 monuments of the world in the garden, and it's a really non-fancy garden. It's a very unknown garden till you go there. It's something, when you go there, you'll really, really like the garden, because it's got the best views of the dock. No other hill in Bombay gives a view of the sea the way this garden gives, and it's shameful that it's not been publicized enough. When we talk of hanging gardens, automatically our thoughts go to Malabar Hill. But if you visit the John Baptista Garden, I think it's absolutely incredible. And if you look at the view, this is from a bungalow from the hill, and that's the kind of view that even exists today, because there's actually nothing around that area still. The St. Anne's Church was where St. Mary's was, and this was one of the oldest churches. It was actually built from a chapel, which is Nesbitt's area. I think her name was Rose Nesbitt, and it was an estate, and it was a chapel before they actually upgraded it into a church. And then you see an architecture which is very, a Gothic revival style of architecture. Most churches that you see have been actually built in the 1800s, but they were all upgraded in the 1900s. And that's why most of the churches around will have a very Gothic architecture, because Gothic revival came to Bombay in the late 1800s. But in a sense, if you look at the older structures of all these churches, you'd realize that they were all Portuguese churches. They were all white and they were all marble. And because they were white, you have a village that was all colorful, because the law of the land was that, the law of the Portuguese land was that the church has to be white and the houses have to be colorful. No house could be allowed to be white. And that's why whenever you go to Goa, whenever you go to Kotachiwadi, you'll have all these colorful houses there. So, sorry, I'm just skipping. I love the grey stone and the red stone and the stained glass. I think it's really beautiful. And all these churches, the stained glass is fascinating. You can walk around and just look at the stained glass and the lovely arches, the pointed arches, absolutely stunning. When we talk about churches, and we talk about, because it's been a hub of diaspora. This place has got, it's incredible. We studied there for 15 years. We had no idea that the amount of people that stay there and the amount of religions that actually exist in Mazagon, it's amazing. You've got everyone. It starts with the Kolis, you've got the Agris coming in, you've got the East Indians that are there, you've got the Boris that are there, and you name it, and even Jains at Love Lane. Like, there's a large community of Jains as well, and it's incredible. I don't think so any other precinct has so much of a social interface like Mazagon. So when you talk about the churches, again, you look at the Renaissance style St. Peter's. It was a little older church, or rather younger church. It was a 1936 church. And of course, the Gloria Church again. But if you look at old photos of the Gloria Church, though it's incredible now, the older photos of Gloria Church will show you how it was made in white marble and a Portuguese church. And it's absolutely beautiful to see the older Gloria Church as well. I essentially love the rose window of the Gloria Church. Though most of us look at it from the flyover, if you can just go into the lane which takes you to Messina Hospital and you look at the Gloria Church on the longitudinal side, they've got one of the most fascinating rose window, which equals to the rose window that you see at the university building. So lovely, again a Gothic revival building. This is the Mankeshwar Mandir, and this is how you can see the amazing Gopuram that's on the top. That's a stone one, and it was a Koli temple, but it was built by the Sutar community, and that area is completely full of the Sutar community also that lives there. Sutar is the carpenter community, and that also came up in Baikla. Of course, sir spoke about the Chinese temple, and a lot of Chinese were invited by the British to come because they were always very good at the shipbuilding business, and that's why they built their first Chinese temple here. And if you look at the buildings around the Chinese temple, about 3-4 of them, they're all got Chinese names because most of the Chinese actually lived around the dockyard area. Again, the Jain temple is at Love Lane, and they call it the mini Dilwara temples. Again, Hasnabad is what sir again spoke to you, but I'm just giving you an image of it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful building. It's the mini Taj, and if you look at it, it's got a light blue dome on the top, and it's absolutely fascinating. If you look at the symmetry, it's as beautiful as the Taj Mahal. And then you have a lot of Parsis living there. You have a lot of Agyaris, a lot of neoclassical Agyaris, simple corbelling, and again, very stunning. But if you look on the top, it's all vernacular in nature. Again, we're going to talk about this in detail, but if you see the East Indian buildings that are there, stunning with the external staircase, those vernacular windows that are there, absolutely incredible. And of course, the color of the houses, each one has got a different color. We had a bakery culture there. I don't know if you all know this, but Vibbs actually has their own factory, has their bakery in just off Darukhana. Britannia, the company, is manufacturing bread at Darukhana, and that whole culture of having these Irani restaurants is incredible. And someone was telling me that, you know, when the Hindu-Muslim riots were there, all these bakeries were open because they were the most neutral bakeries in Bombay. And that's why I think Mazagon never went hungry, because everyone was served bread by these people who were there in these bakeries. And not only Mazagon, we must credit them that all over Bombay was not hungry because of these bakeries that existed. Quickly, I'll talk about the facades. I just love it, and I'm just going to, you know, talk about it. It's incredible. There's Art Deco, there's Neoclassical, there's Baroque. We just look at a few. This is like a vernacular, but just look at the corner building, and it's got absolutely fascinating. Look at the segmented windows that come in, lovely pediments that are there. Again, it's like Khichdi architecture. It's like eclectic. That's how Bombay is. You know, suddenly I'll tell you that there's neoclassical, and then you look and say, oh, but there's Baroque that's happening. So if you look here, you'll see these festoons that are there, garlands that are already there. Absolutely stunning. And then you have a Tudor architecture, you know, the stable architecture that's touching a Gothic building. So again, quite eclectic in its nature. There's an oriel window, and if you look at there, it's got these pearls that are happening, and pearls are usually Baroque architecture. So you have an oriel window, which could be an Arabic window, but it's got Baroque happening on it. So you can imagine that there's a sense of Arabia, and then there's absolutely Baroque, which is actually European. So you've got a culmination of two styles. Look at the Islamic pointed arches, but at the bottom there's windows which are again very vernacular, very Bombay windows, which are these two-leveled windows, which you'll find all over the city. And you'll see an exaggerated keystone in the center of the window in the center photo. So truly eclectic. Again, the East Indian bungalows that are there, the brackets, and again you'll see the festoons. And so if anyone asks me on a walk or when we do these bike rides in Mazagon, what's the architectural style of Mazagon, it'll usually be like what Bombay is, that it's truly eclectic. I really can't pinpoint. So at the end of the walk, everyone's like, oh, but Nikhil told us this is neoclassical, but at the last building he tells us what we saw before is a different style. But that's how Bombay is. You can't really define it. But 100% Mazagon takes the cake for having a large number of different styles of architecture. So I hopefully have given you a little look in of what Mazagon looks like, and now I'm really keen to get the panelists on board. So I'll just like to invite them if they can come, and then we can start off our panel discussion. So I'm going to start with you, Captain. Okay, you've given us a great presentation. I'm going to dig a little more on Mazagon. You've been in the Navy for 25 years. You've been as long in Bombay. I've read your book, and your book is not like the original, the normal books that we see. It's more like a walkthrough. It's like a Lonely Planet book. So tell us a little, how did the book evolve? How did you finally come down to writing it? Because all of us dream of we all have some information in our head, but to actually come down to writing something is a challenge. So how did you actually come down to it? Was it an inspiration of Mazagon? And also, you can maybe talk a little about the history that you may not have covered. Anything that you want to talk to.
Thank you. The very simplistic answer as to why I write is because I am a Babu. You see, after leaving the Navy in 2007, I joined Mazagon Dock, and I was allotted a house in a building called the P&O Terrace. Now, the P&O Terrace has been in existence at least since 1885. So I was living in a building with wooden flooring, with the ground floor of a single room, which was about 1,200 square feet, with bedrooms upstairs and a study further up, with a spiral staircase, detached kitchen, servant quarters and all that. So even after my luxurious naval accommodation, this was luxury of the rundown kind, because my wife had to literally run down from her bedroom and then run up saying that, oh, I forgot a pin on my blouse or something like that, to do her shifts in the airport. But I used to stand on its balcony and look at this Mazagon Hill. And see how beautiful it was. And one day, I was asked to write a book on the history of Mazagon Dock. So I started researching. But my evening pastime was, especially on a full moon night, was this hill. And while I was researching for this book, I chanced upon Eliza Draper. Eliza Draper is a lady who was living in the Belvedere house on top of this hill. And she had problems with her husband. She was married off when she was just about 15 years old to an English bureaucrat who was as dry as any bureaucrat could be. And she had problems with him. She was a very romantic kind of a girl. And when he took her to England to put their children in a school, she falls in love with a French writer. And this French writer, when she returns, carries a small portrait of hers in a locket around his neck and goes wandering all over the place. And writes books on her and writes letters to her. And this is discovered by her husband. So definitely there are problems, especially when he's a bureaucrat. Okay. But she discovers that this dry bureaucrat is not all that dry when it has to do with his maids. So they have problems. And one fine day, with the assistance of a frigate captain who had anchored his frigate below the hill, she elopes by climbing down 2 floors of her house on top of the hill and also the hill, literally rappelling down on clothes. Probably, I don't know whether they had saris those days, but it should have been not Nawaris, it should have been some 18 waris, because she had to climb down from the building on the hill and come into the frigate. And then she has a very sad life. And I start romanticizing with Mazagon now, because I've got a heroine for myself. And I look at this hill every day and see a lot of romance there. And then I start looking at further things and see this elevated railway line coming down from Sanders Road and going on an elevated line all the way to Ray Road. And discover that this was probably the longest elevated line in India that time, and definitely the first electrified railway line in India. So I slowly start discovering. And as a typical village kid, I have this habit of exploring back lanes and side lanes and by lanes and all that. All of us who have grown up in villages would have done it, isn't it? City folks also do it, but with whatever lanes are left. So I would go around exploring and find exactly what Nikhil has said. There's so much of variety here, and it's so people-centric. When you go in Bombay, you talk about, the ready money mansion, but you don't see the ready money. Okay, but where in Matharbagadi, if you talk about a Baptista, you will see Baptista, you will see his auntie, you will see everybody there. So it's a people-centric place. Therefore, it is more interactive for me. And that's when Mazagon started growing on me. And when I finally left Bombay in 21, I wanted to write a book. Not because I am a Babu, I also write books. I had recently published a book on Calicut's heritage. And Calicut was a city where I lived for a few years. And Asad would vouch for the literary fest that happens there. It's probably the largest literary fest anywhere in the world. It happens on a beach. So I used to conduct heritage walks for them. And when I was leaving the city, the publisher who runs this literary fest told me, once you leave the city, then what? I said, I'll write a book so that you people can take it around. So we followed a format, which is more like a Lonely Planet format. And we had map makers. We had, boys doing these sketches. Most of them are architecture students. Sketches for me. I should acknowledge all of them for contributing to this book also. So I said that I'm leaving Mazagon. And khaki had not come in a big way there then. And the only other person who was taking people around I knew in Mazagon was Rafiq Baghdadi, who was growing old and unwell also. So I said, let me follow a format which can be used like Lonely Planet, where you carry the book, there's a map, you can follow the map, everything is marked on the map, it's written about in previous chapters, so I just did that format. Unfortunately for me, COVID was happening. And I did not have map makers here. But fortunately for me, that map maker was so good that she would sit in Jaipur and make maps of Mazagon which she's never visited. Very accurate. You saw that map there which I displayed. That was an 1855 map. So we kept putting layers over it. So she made the 1855 map. I would tell Chinnu, hey Chinnu, there's a railway line there. So she would just draw the railway line. So we just put layers over it, like they filled up Mazagon. We just filled it up architecturally and made the maps. And these boys who have made sketches are again architecture students who are back in Calicut. They have never been to Bombay. But, we would somehow manage it. And that's how the book came about. And that's the style we followed.
Fantastic. I think I'm also going to ask you a question now that you took it up. So they say that Altamount Road, and there was a bungalow Altamount on Altamount Road, and the lady who stayed there came in from Belvedere Palace on the hill. So was it the same lady that then shifted to Altamount Road? Would you know?
No. She
eloped. My curiosity.
Eliza Draper eloped, and she went in the frigate to the place from where Jayaprada comes, Rajmundry. She had an uncle in Rajmundry, and she goes off to Rajmundry, lives there for a year, and then goes away to England. The captain of the ship is punished for having helped her elope, and that's what happened. And the only presence Eliza made after that in Bombay was by way of her ghost, in the Belvedere house. The Belvedere house was believed to be haunted. with Eliza's ghost. So that is only present.
So I was just trying to connect our two next talk as well. So I was just attempting to see if Altamont Road gets connected to Mazagon.
That must be some other eloper.
Some other. So Belvedere House must be having a habit of having people eloping. But anyways, we're not going to get into that. We want to concentrate more on the map. Zeenat, you've done such a fabulous job with the maps. So of course, with these maps, with someone sitting outside, not even Baikla or Mazagon, someone sitting outside Bombay has made the map. So you're sitting inside right there. So tell us more about how this came up. And what went into doing this? How did you think about creating such a masterpiece, a modern masterpiece?
Firstly, I learned a lot of new things about Mazagon today from, and my view of Mazagon is very, very recent. With recent, I mean 15 years. I came into Mazagon, into my studio around 2010. At that point, we were looking for a studio space, and Low Parel was insanely expensive. And the best next thing was turning out to be Baikala Mazagon. That's how we landed up there. But when I came there, from Dockyard Station to coming to our studio, I had to cross the Matharpakadi village. And it was the best time of the day. Every morning, I would walk through those lanes. And eventually, as and when we got settled in the studio, we had a lot of people coming to our studio, visiting us, and who had this question as to why is your studio in Mazagon? At that point, I don't think too many, design studios or those kind of organizations were there in there. And at that point, I had to explain to people that there is a lot more to this place, and I would draw these really tiny pencil maps for them, saying, you turn left and then you'll find this, and then you turn right and then you'll find this. You go eat here, or you visit this place or visit that place. And this was like my regular thing. Every time someone visits the studio, this is what I was doing. And eventually I realized we had a lot of these joints that we would regularly visit. And if someone had to come to Mazagon, because Mazagon, the east-west connectivity is not that great, they had to take a whole detour to come inside Mazagon. It was not on the way from Bandra to Churchgate. It's like completely off, right? So at that point, I thought there was a reason for people to come to Mazagon, not just like to visit one space like the museum or our studio or Rani Bagh, but there's a lot more. So that's how I think we started research on this. We actually finished research and all that back in 2018-19. End of 2019, we were ready to make this map, and then pandemic hit. Then post-pandemic, when we came back to the map, we realized a lot of institutions had shut down. So we had to redo our research and revisit a lot of these places to check what's happening right now. Unfortunately, post-lockdown, we had to also leave our studio space and leave Mazagon. But luckily, by then, institutions like Subco and Bombay Sweet Shop, these guys had reached Mazagon, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to put this map out now with their support. And that's how the map came into place.
Fantastic. As I was telling you, I was quite envious, and I told my team that, if a map like this can come out from Mazagon, why don't we do it for the whole city? So I'm going to get back to you, and we must do something. I also want to know is that how do you use design to kind of engage with the neighborhood or to renew the neighborhood that you are in? Because the map must have done just that. Where you put a name on the map, and then suddenly everyone knows about the area.
Right. Actually, when we were making the map, we visited most of these institutions, and when we started talking to them about putting all of this on the map, they were quite amused as to why are we even doing this? Like, what is this map? And they would tell us that, oh, we are already on Google Maps. So that was a time when we were trying to explain to people why this map is important and why we are putting all of these organizations on this one particular map where, you can just come to Mazagon, Baikala, spend your entire day, visit Rani Bagh, do a lot of things, eat, drink. There's, like he spoke about the multiculturalism in the space. I was blown away when I came to Mazagon. I had no idea where I was going when I initially started working here. I think over the course of the next 2 years, I realized with seasons changing and festivals coming in, it was a blast. Like every festival so amplified that I think this map was much deserved to the place. And whoever we gave this, so we went around a few of the institutions, even shops with these maps, and they were quite happy about it. Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm now going to go to Rahul because he was also the source of the map. You kind of went to him, and so Rahul, we've already spoken about how the maps were made, but how do you go about? I was always very curious to know that how did Sabco zero in on Baikala? Whether the real estate part came first, or you decided to get into an area like Baikala and then develop a kind of a social and cultural hub in that area.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. A bit of imposter syndrome here with these two, but I'll do my best to add some value to the discussion. So yeah, quite an interesting trajectory. So this was back in 21, in the midst of the pandemic. We had just started our first small cafe space in Bandra West, and we felt like we were doing something interesting and seemed like some people agreed, and we started running out of space very quickly in our little bakery, roastery. And at the time, the conventional wisdom was, to do one of two things. To start to do more, production of, roasted coffee or baking bread. The idea would have been to either locate ourselves further outside the city, take advantage of, lower rentals, etc., and utilize logistics to get products, back into the city, right? Naturally. I didn't feel a lot of comfort with that idea for a few reasons, because we wanted to build an organizational culture which imbibed itself in community wherever we were, which meant how could we do that, still produce more product with enough space, still activate sort of a cultural nexus around ourselves, be part of things like the arts communities, the design communities, and retain sort of talent within our organization, and do all of that in the center of the city somewhat, which was kind of like, there wasn't really an answer for that. If you looked at sort of the areas that people would typically think of commercial activity in the contemporary context. I'm also a transplant to Bombay, so I can't claim to be an expert by any stretch, but that would have meant maybe going further down south, being in Lower Parel, being in Andheri or Juhu, etc. For us, it all sort of started to make a little bit of sense to me personally, but not to anybody else around me when I said Baikala, because the geographic construct was there. Like, so I started thinking, okay, if we were to have the privilege one day of having multiple Sabco outlets or spaces, and we wanted to be ingrained in the city's urban infrastructure, the only place I could really see it happening was somewhere around this Mazagon, Baikala area, because the historic industrial nature of the neighborhood meant that there were still structures of a warehouse sort of nature that still existed there because of the dockyards, because of the history of industrialization that kind of that was covered in large part by Sir. And so that's sort of what practically started the journey of considering Baikala for this space. Now, the interesting part became we didn't want to treat it just as a back-end production space. We wanted to also activate community from a consumer lens within that production environment. So what I tell people is typically those who aren't as familiar with coffee or bread or chocolate as an industry probably are familiar with beer or wine. So breweries and wineries serve two purposes. Typically, they offer public access to the engine as well as serve as a production space. We wanted to do that with coffee and with bread. And we thought that Baikala and Mazagon made a whole lot of sense for us to be able to do that in the center of the city while still being sort of part of a possible urban renewal that we saw had kind of happening in one of the last areas of kind of central Mumbai, which weren't really active in any consumer context, whilst also being so rich in diversity where we felt our brand, Subco, could really organically fit in.
Thanks. I'm going to get back to you on stuff that we like in Subco as well, the cuisine, etc. But I'm going to come back to you, Captain. And you spoke about it, but it's on a very personal note, and I think everyone will agree with me that we don't know much about the docks. It's kind of a very secretive thing, of course. I mean, it can't be open to all. So we want to know a little more about it, maybe the history, but we want to know what exactly transpired it and what really happens. We know for a fact that the shipbreaking happens at Darukhana. So we all know it from a perspective, a very basic perspective. But if you can give us a little more in-depth, it'll be nicer.
Yeah, actually the shipbreaking unit has nothing to do with the Mazagon dock. That's a separate enterprise altogether. Mazagon dock, as I said, came up as a simple dock in 1774. But a mention of it having the possibility of being developed as an area for ship repairs is there in that first letter that Gerard Angwer writes about developing Bombay. I think it is 1671. That letter carries a mention of Mazagon as a possible place to repair ships of up to 200 tons. So it made a beginning there. And by 1774, they had this first dry dock. And as I said, it became an anchoring area for P&O. And P&O's activities and also activities of a lot of our own traders like the Parsis, the Jews, the Gujaratis, the Malabaris, who all were trading from here, shipping from here, grew thanks to opium and then cotton. So now Mazagon became a busy anchoring area, and as Suez Canal opened, definitely steamers also started coming in. And now P&O mainly needed a place to repair their ships. And that's how they developed a dock there. Before P&O actually built a dry dock there, Mazagon dock was an extension of the government dockyard, which is right here, the Bombay dock. So it was an extension of the Bombay dock belonging to the British government, and the P&O took it over and built what we call as the Ritchie dock, the Kasara Basin and all that. Parallelly, the Nizam of Hyderabad built the Mughal dock. Now, these are all the docks which are within the Mazagon dock. These are all dry docks within Mazagon dock. And several ship owners came buying ships here, including the Imam of Muscat. And the Parsi, the Wadia master builders here, now shifted into Mazagon with people like Karsatji Wadia and others. And they continued shipbuilding there. And it went on and on and on. Later B&I came, British India Steam Navigation came. And the southern part of Mazagon dock, which consists of Mughal dock and all that, was taken over by the British India Steam Navigation. The north dock by P&O, south by British India. And they were working together. And slowly shipping declined. And by the time the world wars came in, they realized that it's better to work as a single company. So they kind of joined hands and came up in 1934 as the Mazagon dock that we know today, where both the yards were combined. in between the two, there was a small strip of land with a small dry dock, which was owned by the Scindias from 1919 onwards, when they got into shipping. So they also had a small shipyard in between, and business went on as a shipbuilding, ship repair yard. As India got its freedom and the P&O and BISN and all moved out, the yard fell into a kind of disuse. Whereas this part of the government dockyard was taken over by the Navy. And some of the old, dry docks are still there being used. That went into a little bit of a disuse. Mackinnon Mackenzie were the agency running that place then. To such an extent that a part of the South Yard was hired off to Mahindra and Mohammed. The first jeeps assembled by Mazagon Dock, by Mahindra and Mohammed, was in Mazagon Dock. And during the P&O days, it was so luxurious a place that Mazagon had its own ice plant, Mazagon Dock, because luxury liners had to have ice. Those days it was a luxury item. So Fatar ki pani used to be made there. It also had a sheep farm. Because, those business class travelers traveling these ships were not very happy with our own bakra, So they used to get the best of bakras from Armenia, Australia, Britain and all, and keep them in Mazagon. So as part of Mazagon Dock, there was even a sheep farm. And a whole lot of it was, their time, it was a very luxurious place. This P&O Terrace where I stayed, that row house would have had a maid servant or a servant carrying the sahib's coffee or liquor by a spiral staircase. By the time I stayed there, the spiral staircase was so rickety that if I climbed it, I would fall down. But there was a time. And then it dwindled and it went into disuse. And that's when Mr. V.K. Krishnamenon and Jawaharlal Nehru decided to start this defense public sector enterprises. And Mazagon Dock was taken over by the government of India in 1960. Since then, they have been essentially building for the Navy and the Coast Guard, though they have built for a lot of other ship owners, including ONGC. About 70% of the Bombay High, and that time about 60% of their offshore vessels were built in Mazagon Dock. And slowly in the 1980s, they went into submarine building. And behind those high walls, there's a lot of strategic work happening. Some of you must be holding shares of the dock. It's really doing well, right? And to that extent, we should all be proud that Mazagon Dock has kept alive the oldest organized industry in the country with serious constraints, because the water depth there is only a few meters. But with all those constraints, they're still building, world-class destroyers, frigates, submarines and all that. So that's what's happening inside.
Fantastic. Good. So we're now going to go to the next best thing about Mazagon, which Zeenat, no one knows Mathar Pakdi better than you do because you've been there. More pointedly, I want to ask you two things. One is the architectural heritage of the area and the public art around, and how do you engage that with the people of the village?
Our first studio was in the most ugliest building, which was part of the Mathar Pakdi village. So we were on the first floor looking at all of these beautiful houses right behind the building. The building that we were in also had a story and was a bungalow itself, which was then broken down and then this ugly building came up. The village itself, during Christmas, it is till date. If you just enter the lane around the Christmas time, there are these big stars that are hanging right above your head with carols, Christmas carols playing. And it's the most soothing thing when you walk inside. In terms of, the village also has this culture of music. So every evening you walk around, you hear these piano sounds playing from different houses. Each of these houses now, actually, there are quite old people living there, trying to shoo away all the builders. After that first studio went away, we moved to this other building called Hilal Building, which is actually a stone and wooden building, which is also 125 years old. When we went into that building and when we saw the space where our studio was, it was actually a tuition class. So a 300 square feet, 350 square feet area, dissected in different classes. The arches there were completely sealed off with wooden panels so as to have the AC on. So when we went in, we had to first, tear everything down to see what the space was actually. With this, you would imagine, I'm talking about a 350 square feet area. Imagine what is happening in the rest of the village around it, in front of it, behind it. There was another 100-year-old building right in front of Hilal Building, which was there when we just moved in there, which is now a massive high-rise, a 65-story building which doesn't see anything. So over the years, I've seen the space change. Previously, there were a lot of the bakeries. They're still there, but again, like Super Bakery used to have this very beautiful mascot that was painted on their gate, and everything hand-painted, which is now, they have like a vinyl sign, they have all those acrylic cutout sheets. So that kind of a change has also been very evident. There is actually a Gulzar cafe that used to be there right at the corner. And they used to have keema pao and bun maska and chai, which was a regular joint every evening, which is now Gulzar Sweets, swanky, lit up like anything. It's changed. It doesn't look like what it was. So slowly, when, as in how I've been seeing this space, things are changing, olden things are still there, but I don't know how much we can conserve. I don't see any kind of conservation happening there. Even Hilal Building is quite old. Our old studio now is a spa. Which is also, again, very, very swanky. I don't know what's happening with the wooden floorings, but completely full of tiles. So there is no regulation of that sort. And
I think there's one issue, which is that there's a different community that's also starting to come in. Even if it's the same house, maybe, you had the Christians and the East Indians living there, and then you have, this is what I observed, and then you have a different community that comes in, and suddenly, maybe the house is not redeveloped, but you suddenly have the windows changing into a sliding window. You have the staircase becoming a tiled staircase and not the Indo-Portuguese tile, the vitrified tiles, and smaller things. So even if it's not changed as a building, it's not become a high-rise, these are the most disappointing things of the area,
So Hilal Building that I was talking about, which is 125 years old, if you stand right in front of the building and just view the facade, you don't have to go inside, don't do anything, just view the facade, and you'll see every single house looks very different from the other. And you can tell, 1980s mein isme kaam hua tha, ye 1990s ka kaam hai, this is 2000s. You can clearly tell who's moved in when and what kind of work they've done. So although the building has been there for 125 years, but every single part of that building is now from a different era. Interiors, exteriors, both. So that's the state of architecture right now.
Yeah, it's quite painful. I'm going to ask Rahul, so we're a little running out of time, so I'm going to ask Rahul and then I'll ask a question to all three of y'all. But Rahul, what are you've gone in the center of an old neighborhood. Do you face any challenges or it's a great thing? Because as I said, it was always, Baikla was an odd place to have sabko. For a person like me, a coffee lover, and we say that, oh, from Bandra West, you've now gone to Baikla. So was it challenging in a way to get people there, or because how was it in the area? What is the neighbors like?
Yeah, I mean, I think challenging understatement. I think there's a certain pattern. Naturally, every urban environment has trends and patterns of consumer behavior, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And shifting the goalposts on that is probably one of the harder things that a sort of brand can try to aspire to do. So at the outset, I guess the risks that we sort of took as a small business, as a startup, were to not treat this space as just like I said earlier, just a space to roast our coffee beans or bake our bread and then distribute it, right? Instead, to invest upfront into building what we felt was an interesting kind of customer experience center where you could transparently see the processing of the coffee and see the processing of the baked goods, and hope that one day in the future people may decide to kind of retrofit an old printing printing press, which still operates multiple units of printing in the area and right next to us. It's called Jack Printers, and they do some fantastic work. In fact, they helped us with the map. So that was another cool integration between Zenith, her team, ourselves, a couple of others, Bombay Sweet Shop. So challenging for sure in the beginning. I think the idea was that people, when I look at sort of the map and I see, as Zenith mentioned, sort of Lower Parel, not so far away, right? And then the dockyards, and then you have this like gap in between, and you're like, what the hell, there's nothing really here. But then there's so much there, right? And you're like, wait a second. I remember the first time I came to see the site, and I saw some of these exact same structures, these heritage structures that had been semi-dilapidated, and then these beautiful Parsi temples along the way. And then I read this story about how Manto used to frequent this area and this neighborhood. And when I found out about Manto, I was like very inspired. And I said, if Manto used to be here, there must be a lot more here than I know about. And eventually, I don't think we ever could have predicted the volume of people that were willing over time to start to discover, rediscover a neighborhood. And that sort of inspired me a lot, and continues to in the way that people seem to be doing now around coffee. And I think that's not unique to Subco. I think coffee is an equalizer in many ways, in my view, the socialization tool in many ways. And so I think we've just always imbibed this principle of sort of readaptive reuse as much as we can when it comes to the spaces we try to create cafes in. And I think that fit really well with what's happening in Baikala. And so we tried to be as respectful as we could as to what was going on. So to your point, I mean, we took the printing press as it was, and we put our stuff in and we painted it, but it was still a printing press, and that's what it is, right? So, that's that.
Lovely. So I'm going to ask you one last question, all of y'all. I'm going to open it for the three of y'all, because no precinct can be without the cuisine of it. So, Captain, I want you to take us through the history. I want Zeenat to talk about the typography of all these old places and what she does with it. And then, of course, we've got Rahul here to talk about the newer cuisine, what he's introducing into the area. So I think the cuisine part binds everyone. It also binds architecture to it. So, but if you could just start off.
Yeah, before I answer that, I would like to thank you all once again, because normally when we have a session like this, it starts like a local train in Churchgate, By the time it reaches Marine Lines, it's full. And by the time we are halfway through the session, it is like the train is crossed Borivali and all that. And later on,
That's why we didn't finish off with you. We didn't ask you three questions also, with due respect to everyone. But so that's the reason.
Yeah, so towards the end of the session, it is like the train is even gone beyond Virar.
You should thank Asad for
So
that.
I should thank all of you all for staying on, and I think you all deserve a big applause for this. Thank you all. Now, one more point is that when you write about Mazagon, it is like writing a medieval romantic novel, because Mazagon has got everything that we discussed. It's also got a long line of graveyards, where some of the tragedians of the city, like Meena Kumari or Rati Jinnah, are buried. So when you write about Mazagon, you feel like a medieval tragedy, novelist on the job. But it's a very interesting place to write. There's much more to write about it. Coming to cuisine is one thing that probably somebody can take up. The cuisines of different islands of the city, Mazagon is a typical Kohli place. So you still find Bombay duck drying on clothing lines. So that's very much a part of the cuisine. I am told that toddy of a much adulterated kind still goes on, because many of my dock workers have their share of narangi, So that's still a part of the cuisine there. But the more interesting stuff is pav. The pav was brought in by the Portuguese, because that kind of dried, kind of burnished looking bread would last longer than normal bread. And they passed it on to their clergy, who in turn passed it on to the members of their parish, who were essentially East Indians. So that's how pav became a predominant food item in Mazagon, patronized first by the East Indians and then by the rest of all of us, isn't it? We long for pav in Kerala. But that's become the standard food item of Bombay, and it definitely had its origins in places like Mazagon. Then there's a lot of mutton varieties that are available in Mazagon. Because of different sects of Shias and Sunnis both staying there, you get halal and non-halal food, different varieties. And the good thing about Mazagon still is that when you walk along Mazagon, it is like walking along one of those old streets in Konkan or Kerala or anywhere, where every house has got a different fragrance of food. So you continue to get that in Mazagon. Then bakeries like Britannia, you said, came and set shop in Mazagon. Whips set up shop in Mazagon. A lot of Irani cafes used to be there, the corner buildings that you saw. Pine restaurant, for example. I think now it is a bar or something. Pine was a Irani cafe. Then the Pathans. The Pathans who worked in the dock, they of course patronized the Mazagon Dock Bar, which still exists in the Remedios building, but they had brought in a lot of Central Asian kind of food also. So if you look at the history of Mazagon's food culture, it's got this rich variety, There are a lot of Konkanis. And the Mankeshwar temple, for example, if you go there, the prasad that you get, and you eat in front of the Deepa's thumb, is very Konkani. And the scripts, there are mostly erased scripts, on stones in front of the temple, which is a typical Kannada, the Konkani Kannada. So that kind of food is also available, okay. And the other thing about English food definitely would have been there at some point in time, Parsi food. But the other thing about Mazagon is that there are a lot of these canteens, And Mazagon is a good place to have canteen food, starting with our own canteen, Mazagon canteen, where you still get a sumptuous sandwich for some 50 paisa or something like that. Okay, and a lot of these mills which are running there had their own canteen. So a lot of old East Indians in Mazagon still remember the canteen food. So that's what I remember about this.
Zina, do you want to take about the typography of all this?
Typography, like we've been talking about the multicultural aspect of Mazagon, you'll see a lot of different scripts coming together. Like he mentioned about Kannada, you have this, Arabic script also coming in. You have Marathi, you have Hindi, Devanagari, you have English now because everyone's using it. So all of this is coming together, but most of the typography now is just like the modern bit. So you get to see the olden thing very less. Only on certain buildings is where you will still get to see the olden stuff. Like I was talking about, Gulzar Cafe had a beautiful, beautiful signboard outside, hand painted, which is now not there. Also, you find a lot of dentists, Chinese dentists, still around. So you get to see a lot of Chinese scripts.
That's
also
near the dockyard area.
Yeah, there's one very close to Mathapakadi village as well. So it's a great mix, but typography-wise, it's not so exciting right now. Yeah.
So, Rahul, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then Asad can take over. Tell us something more about the newer cuisines that are coming in. How do you tackle that in an area that's so rooted? We've learned so much about its roots today, and to introduce a new. Every day there's a new thing coming out at Sabko, so and how does that kind of blend with the culture?
Yeah, I think it's, initially I felt there was a bit of almost a burden, right? You're entering this insanely rich tapestry of like old school bakeries everywhere. And we touched on that a couple of times. Britannia obviously being the most industrial version of that. But many other Parsi and otherwise historically. And we come in as both a coffee roaster and a baker. So for those of you who are familiar with us, we bake sourdough bread primarily, and we make different versions of croissants or laminated dough-based products. So that was a bit of an intimidating thing to kind of come into and be like, okay, we're going to be this new school bakery, but like be within this old school framework. And I think that was one of the first things we grappled with. And I think both us and our neighbors, the Bombay Sweet Shop, kind of, I think inherently we both seem to be brands that are paying a lot of respect to a sort of more nostalgic understanding of what contemporary kind of craft food and beverage may look like through the way we design our products, but also through the flavor profiles, through the actual products themselves. So I think in that sense, we kind of gel really nicely as neighbors to kind of hopefully contribute in a positive way to the renewal of the neighborhood in some sense, while also respecting the original, the Sarvis and that side of things, which I think I sincerely hope will always remain part of a crawl. In my brain, if I was a kind of consumer coming to Baikala or Mazagon, my hope is that you go buy a Sarvi, you get your roll, you enjoy that, you maybe visit the museum, you then come by Sabko, you grab a coffee. It all exists as a nice ecosystem of disparate diversity that plays out where none has to replace the other. And that's my sincere hope when it comes to the future of the neighborhood. And I'd like to exist in that framework and not in one in which everything disappears and there's only Sabkos everywhere. So that's my hope.
Thanks so much. We've had a really engaging talk with these three stalwarts.
Asad, I'll just take 1 minute. Sure. Yeah, after you finish.
No, you can carry on.
I'll just take 1 minute because I see a lot of youngsters here. Normally for such talks we don't get many youngsters. And I'm sure some of you want to write books like this. So the reward of writing books like this, of course I can see my smiling publisher there. I hope you have sold some copies. Okay, but then the reward of writing books like this is that, strange friends throw up from nowhere. I have got Mr. Kuwarji Gawadia. You're sitting there. Yeah, I wrote about, this Parsi gentleman who was the first Patel of Mazagon, because he defended Mazagon against the Siddhis. So he was elevated to the position of a Patel and allowed to carry a pistol. And I wrote about this Patel and wrote about the Patel's bungalow in the book. I think a few months after the book was published, I got a call from, did you call from Udwara? Where did you call from? I get a call from Udwara saying that I'm Kuwarji Gawadia, I belong to the Patel family. Now, these are the interesting connects you make. So in case you guys want to write books, don't hope for much money out of it, unless you are Chopra Day or Chetan Bhagat. But books like this give you a lot of rewards like this. Now, Mr. Kuwarji and I are great friends, and he keeps sending me regular, online copies of Parsi newspapers, which I love to read. So these are kind of small, interesting sidelines on writing these kind of books. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for this insightful panel. Normally we keep 15 minutes for Q&A, but I think the panel just took over, and I think the audience might have some questions for you later. Thank you, Captain Babu, Rahul, and Zeenat, and obviously Nikhil. And to our hosts, Jayashri, I don't know if she's still here, and Bjorn and Robert, and to our audiences for being here. This series has taken a life of its own. I think the next edition is going to be Kotachi Wari, I think, which is going to be on October 22nd or 23rd. I'm not quite sure right now, but one of those days, so hopefully we'll see you guys there. Mazagon has a special place for me. The graveyard you talked about, the school. You forgot to say Chont, who used to sell things outside St. Mary's School as part of the cuisine. But it's many good memories, and I think looking at Precincts and looking at decoding Bombay or Mumbai as we know it through these myopic lenses or these macro lenses, whichever way you want to call it, makes it even more special place that we all call our home now. So thank you very much for being here, and have a wonderful evening.